I'm Theresa, and I'm a PhD student at the University of Iceland. And my research focuses on the establishment of the European flounder in Iceland. And today I'm presenting you some results of the stakeholder engaging aspects of my research. In Iceland, as of 2020, 36 alien species have been recorded that are associated with the coastal and freshwater habitats, one of them being the European flounder. European flounder has been first identified in Iceland in 1999, after it was caught at a river mouth in the southwest corner of Iceland. Just a year later, it was also caught in the southeast, near the town of 𝘗𝘭𝘢𝘵. And from these 2 points, the population kind of spread clockwise around the country. Nowadays, you can find the flounder around most of Iceland. The only area we're still uncertain of is the northeast corner. But in the areas where the flounder does occur, it's most abundant in the estuaries, but it's often also found several kilometers up the river. But despite it being around for more than 2 decades now, there's hardly any research being done on it. So my PhD actually represents the first comprehensive research on flounder in Iceland. And I've been working with the species since 2017, when I did my master thesis. The results were published in this paper in 2020. But while I was doing this research, I encountered a lot of people, mostly recreational fishermen, who were not only super interested in this topic, but they were more than happy to share their experience and their opinions about the flounder. And if you've ever talked to middle-aged men about their fishing, you know what I mean. And so, hearing all these stories, I realized that there's so much more knowledge out there beyond what we document scientifically. So I became curious, how can we benefit from this knowledge? So I made that part of my PhD. And the first question I'm asking is, can the experience of recreational anglers benefit our knowledge of the past and current distribution of flounder in Iceland? So I created an online survey that was passed out via social media and email between October 2019 and June 2020, so roughly 8 months. We ended up having 209 people participating, and I asked them, where have they encountered flounder? Before I show you the results of this question, let me show you what has been documented on flounder in the 20 years after its first identification. These are 92 locations around Iceland that were documented by institutions like the Marine and Freshwater Institute, the Directorate of Fisheries, and similar. And that was collected over 2 decades. Now, these are the results from the survey. I took a conservative approach where I only included those locations that I could confidently identify, and still ended up with 100 locations collected in 8 months. I'm not saying that either of these approaches are better or worse than the other, but if done right, they can complement each other and really help us out. Secondly, I was curious, what is the perception of stakeholders such as recreational anglers on the flounder, and what are potential drivers of this perception? So in the same survey, I asked them to rate their agreement to 4 questions. Whether they think the flounder has a negative impact on their fishing experience, whether they think it could even be important for recreational fishing, whether it has a negative impact on native species, and whether they consider it a plague. And what can I say if the flounder was perceived highly negative? Most people do not think at all that the flounder could be important for recreational fishing in Iceland, but they do agree that it has a negative impact on their fishing experience, on other species, and consider it a plague. So what does drive this perception? First, I looked at it statistically. I generated 6 more variables on top of the perception questions. Those variables dealt with characteristics of the participant, such as where are they fishing, how much are they fishing, how important is salmon for their fishing, how important are trout and char for their fishing, as well as 2 variables dealing with their previous flounder experience. I applied the Candle-Tau rank correlation, and the only significant result I found was that the more important salmon is for their fishing, the more likely they are to agree that the flounder has a negative impact on their fishing experience, which, given the high prices of salmon fishing, not very surprising. So I took it a step further and conducted semi-structured interviews with stakeholders, with recreational fishermen, with people involved in management, and with scientists. Talking to recreational fishermen, one thing that kept coming up was that they're fearing that the flounder is competing with the native salmonids and eating the eggs. And actually, another point that was raised is one participant said that his wife, when they caught a flounder, was super happy to catch this fish. She saw it as food, just as any other species. He himself, who grew up in Iceland, was not as happy. He said it's ugly. It just doesn't look as nice as trout or salmon. And if you think about all those pictures on social media of people holding up proudly the salmon catches, I get it. The flounder doesn't really compete with that. When I was talking to people involved in management, these concerns from recreational anglers were acknowledged and known about. Their own concerns are less strong, or their own opinions were less strong. They even said it's probably time to just treat it as part of the fauna in Iceland. Similar views came up when talking to scientists. Again, they acknowledged the concern raised by recreational fishermen and attributed mostly to the fact that they're fearing that flounder is impacting the salmon, and it's just not what they expect in the rivers. But they also raised the point that people are probably just getting used to it, and they're even starting to wonder now, how can we make money out of this species? So my final question, I was wondering if this negative perception in Iceland, if that's related to just the flounder being present, being invasive in Iceland, or if that's because of the species itself, and if it's similar throughout its native range. So I created a similar survey, passed it on via, again, social media and email to countries like Germany, Denmark, Norway, Sweden. It was open for participation in 2021, May 2021, and 223 people participated. But given that in those areas, they are likely to encounter other flatfish species as well, I asked them to identify the flounder out of 3 flatfish species that looked similar. 167 people successfully answered this. So their answers were considered for further analysis. And I asked them the same question. I asked them to rate their agreement to whether they think the flounder is important for recreational fishing, whether they think the flounder has a negative impact on their own fishing experience or other species, and whether they consider it a plague. And the response was completely flipped. People really think the flounder is important for recreational fishing, but they do not think at all that it has a negative impact on their fishing experience. They don't see it as a plague and don't even really think about it having a negative impact on other species. Here's a comparison, the views documented in Iceland. So you can see it's completely opposite. So yeah, just a couple of take-home messages. Firstly, the knowledge from recreational fishermen really benefited us and strongly increased our knowledge of the flounder distribution in Iceland. Secondly, the Icelandic recreational fishing community has a strongly negative perception on flounder in Iceland. And this negative perception is likely driven by concerns about it having negative impacts on native salmonids. And finally, the perception among recreational fishing communities throughout its native range, like Germany, Denmark, Sweden, is showing completely opposite trends than to what is documented in Iceland. The flounder is actually perceived as highly positive, and people were even asking me, why do you ask us these questions? So yeah, thank you for listening, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to talk about fish.